This is a problem within Palestinian society that has to be dealt with the same way there are problems within Israeli society that has to be dealt with. And I'm not going to use my suffering as a tool to try and destroy another person's identity. But don't do the same.
So I'm Palestinian, SJP's
right. We're native to the land of Israel. Why is that valid? First of all, it's valid because we fought for it and we kicked out the British and we actually made it happen. And it's valid because we're also native people in this land. Would you fight for it?
How does that validify this statement?
Okay, this statement, if you're against Jews having a right to self-determine, if you're against black people having civil rights, if you're against Native Americans being able to have access to Standing Rock, you're against Native Americans, you're against black people, you're against Jews. If you're against Tibetans being able to go back to Tibet, you're against Tibetans. So if you're against Jews being able to live in their homeland, you're against Jews.
It's not the same though.
What's not the same?
It's not the same as that there were no Jews in the homeland when
There were always Jews.
Yeah, but not to the extent where everyone just poured in like that.
Well, it's an act of decolonization to come back to our land. The Roman kicked us out, sold us
But
into...
it's an act of genocide to kick everyone out.
Oh, but no, okay, so that's something completely different. That's ethnic conflict, right? There was a war, and there's a context there, and we can discuss that. However, the right for the Jews to come back to the land has nothing to do with that, right? You're not against Zionism. You're against, like, what happened after with the conflict.
I guess the concept of Zionism, like, in its perfect sense, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that, like, in general, the way that self-determination has been carried out is too controversial for that statement to be true in the context of history and what's going on.
So Zionism itself is a grassroots movement. It's not a movement of politics, it's a movement of the people. You had people that were capitalists, Marxists, socialists, everyone united behind the idea that the Jews have a right to self-determine. Now, you're not okay with what happened after the wars and during the wars, right? Palestinians being displaced, Jews dying, Palestinians dying, you're not okay with that. No one is okay with that.
No.
Not even Israelis are okay with that. However, when you go and you say that you're against Zionism, you're telling everyone who is a Zionist, right, which is all Israelis, that you're against their idea that they have a right to live there. So maybe it's not up to...
because I think it's also wrong what Hamas is doing, and I think I think both sides are wrong there.
But would you say you're against Palestinians because of Hamas?
But I would say that.
So why would you say that you're against Zionism because of the policies that you
I would say that I'm against the Islamic-rooted ideas that terrorism is okay for jihad and for everyone like that.
Or that we should hunt out all the Jews in the world and a bunch of different things that they spread. Right. However, Zionism has nothing that you can say that you're against. You can told me just now that if it's just that idea, you're for it. Like, people who define Zionism are Zionists, not anti-Zionist. What is happening is you have a group like SJP on campus who will never talk about Palestinian suffering when it comes to other countries, right? There are thousands dying in Syria, hundreds of thousands of refugee camps. That's fine. But then they'll try and conflate the issues of Palestinian suffering which should be dealt with and Zionism. They're trying to get you to the... Depends on which campus. Some campuses, they're very violent. But there's a movement, the Anti-Zionism movement, is a movement trying to conflate Palestinian suffering, which everyone, no matter where you're from, should be fighting for to end, and conflating it with Jewish right to self-determine. Right? If I'm against Hamas, I'm not going to say I'm against Palestinians. So if you're against certain policies or certain actions that were taken either by the government or by just what happened as an effect of the wars, you shouldn't say you're against Zionism, because what you're doing is alienating and ostracizing and even demonizing the entirety of the Jewish people that believe they have right to exist.
What if I say I'm not anti-Zionism if no one in the end was removed? I would say anyone can come to I mean, it's not realistic, it's in concept. Anyone can come, anyone can say this is our holy land, we can live here, but against the idea that other people should be removed, then yes, I would not be anti-Zionist.
But that's exactly it. Zionism has nothing to do with that. As a Zionist, I'm against any individual living in this land to be removed from the land. So Zionism is not defined by an anti-movement that was created in order to kind of trick people to get into the conclusion that we're anti-Zionist.
It's not defined, but it's enforced that way.
But there's an actual definition of Zionism. You can Google it, there's in the dictionary, every Zionist defines by that word, right? Like, why was Hitler so successful? Right? Because he convinced the population in their suffering of economic problems that the problem was the Jews, right? What they're trying to do is find the problem in the conflict and blame it on Zionism, on the Jew, right? That's why they go to, like, Black Student Association and say, oh, you suffer from police brutality and racism. Well, we suffer from Jewish racism and Israeli brutality. Hey, Native Americans from white colonials stole your land. Well, the Jews are a bunch of white people from Europe who stole our land. They're not only appropriating Palestinian suffering, but they're also appropriating other minority suffering to get them to the conclusion that Israel is the horrible force in life that causes everyone to suffer. That's what anti-Semitism is. That's why anti-Zionism, being against Jews having a right to live in their land, and then trying to associate it to everything evil and negative, is a form of anti-Semitism.
By your definition of Zionism,
The definition, though, not mine.
okay, by the definition, yeah, it's like I understand that's like the dictionary definition, but then like when I hear Zionism, even though that's not the definition, just what's implied by it. Like to me, it's just associated with so many things
that's misinformation. Like you go to Israel, you tell them Zionism, no one will see it as something negative. They'll just see it as the right that we have to live here as well. Right?
because no Palestinian would see it as negative.
That's the problem. To be pro-Palestinian today means you must be anti-Israel, and a lot of people, it does today. Like on campuses, you'll speak to like pro-Palestinian activists. They'll always speak to you in a language of Israel has to be destroyed. But the pro-Israel group won't say that. And I don't believe every Palestinian is like that. I live in Israel, right? I have many Palestinian friends, and we're trying to change the society and empower those who have actual voices. However, the movements on campuses are not a space to help Palestinian rights. They're a movement to use Palestinian suffering to keep them suffering in order to try and convince the world that Israel is the devil.
See, I guess I just think like none of this belongs on campus, because what happens is a bunch of like white cuts from over here think they know what they're talking about. You think with Palestine, you get a bunch of white people who don't know shit just trying to defend Palestine. Like they don't know shit about it.
Yeah. But we're here because there's a conference this weekend.
SJP is a joke.
It depends on, like, first of all,
I'm Palestinian, SJP is a
right.
I'll say
However, like, anti-Semitism isn't a joke.
No, it's not a joke.
Right? But, like, they're bringing people that spew anti-Semitism that have killed Jews and who support killing Jews. So for us, that's not a joke. Right? That's why we're here.
SJP sucks, like, I know. This is basically, like, why are we hearing this and not that, but, like, why don't we just make a club like Israelis and Palestinians for justice in Israel?
We do a lot of that. However, there should be a Palestinian group, but the Palestinian voice should not be hijacked by a group that actually doesn't care about Palestinian rights. There should be a Jewish and Israel group, but we're definitely not like opposed to having conversations or trying to find common ground with Palestinians to move forward.
If you're like saying this Zionist definition and you want it removed from all other things associated, then like why is Palestinian associated with like terrorist salaries here, you know?
Okay, because that's the Palestinian Authority is actually paying people who are going and killing Jews. That's a reality that's happening.
The Authority is doing that too,
No,
and every
they're
Israeli
not paying anybody to kill. If an Israeli citizen goes and kills a Palestinian, they are jailed and they are condemned by an entire society. That is true.
That's not true.
That is 100% true. Like it's very rare to find that, right? Because it's a bad thing in our society in Israel for someone to go and kill a Palestinian, doesn't matter, any human being. Like the Palestinian Authority, Abu Mazen going and telling civilians you should go and kill Jews.
That's because they don't have infrastructure to have anything like the IDF.
This
is the IDF of Palestine.
Palestinians are suffering, and I believe that Israel has a responsibility to change the reality because it has the power. However, we still need to condemn when the leadership of the Palestinians who are on the 12-year or their 4-year term, so it's not really a leadership that represents the people, right, is promoting and supporting the murder of Jews. We need to be able to condemn that because this person here, okay, in this sign is my friend who died this summer who came to UCLA 2 years ago. He had an entire family and he was killed when he went to go to grocery shopping. And the individual civilian Palestinian who killed him, this doesn't represent Palestinians, this represents this individual, but the PA is supporting him and giving him money to his family. And when he gets out of prison, he has a whole bunch of money in his bank account. That should be condemned.
Right.
That's like a real issue affecting me. However, I will stand here and let everyone know that this has nothing to do with Palestinians.
Yeah.
This is a problem within Palestinian society that has to be dealt with the same way there are problems within Israeli society that has to be dealt with. And I'm not going to use my suffering as a tool to try and destroy another person's identity. But don't do the same. And be willing to condemn it if it happens.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. To be honest, the way I see it is either leaderships don't have an interest in actually changing the paradigm, right? Because the right-wing government in Israel needs there to be some sort of like force that threatens the society in order to get elected, because right-wing politics are elected based on security. So if you have a threat, you need a government that provides you with security, and that's how they keep being elected, so they don't have an interest in changing the conflict. And the PA, we all know that they're with a bunch of money in their pockets from all the humanitarian aid that gets poured to, to help their people, but it all goes into their pockets. So neither of them actually have interest in changing the solution. And the way we actually create change is by people on the ground. right? By introducing people to one another, having them experience one another, and create maybe a movement from the ground up that decides to create a different scenario in the future. Regardless as if one believes in one state, two state, three state, regardless of what the final, how it's going to look like, we need to start speaking to one another in order to build that, because Israelis don't know what Palestinians need to feel that they've accomplished self-determination. And Palestinians don't know what Israelis need to feel that they've accomplished self-determination. And we're always showing it as it's one or the other. Free Palestine means like no more Israel and the Jews are allowed to live, but no more Israel. That's not okay for Jews.
It doesn't mean that necessarily. Like my uncle's still living in a refugee camp. It means like get him back to his home.
See, then those conversations have to be had, because then if an Israeli understood that that's what it meant, they'd be for it. However, when they hear Free Palestine from people in SJP, which are like taking away the voices of your family, right? They hear it as destroy Israel, and that's the same thing happening here. Like, you guys need to have conversations with us to understand what we mean when we're saying Zionism, and understand that we too want to find a solution, because there's no future without Palestinians and no future without Israelis.
No, there's a future without Palestinians, and it's pretty soon.
But because there's a genocide?
Yeah.
But how come they've quadrupled in the past 30 years?
Same reason
population.
The Israeli population has.
So there's not a genocide. There are people being killed. However, it's not a genocide. They're growing in numbers.
You think that if they keep growing, you think that they're gonna start integrating back into the mainland and stuff, or do you think that something's gonna happen? Something's gonna snap? I mean,
listen, I don't think that there's gonna be a full-out war where one wipes out the other.
I feel like the way people see it is that you get a sketchy terrorist missile shooting over, or a suicide
that killed
bombing.
a few people this past week.
Yeah,
so it's not that sketchy. It actually kills people.
Well, that's why it's sketchy, because it's just not like an actual nuclear warhead or anything that Israel has technologically
but it never
advanced.
sent any nuclear war that's ever onto anywhere.
Well, they don't use it.
Yes, but targeting when Israel fires back, it doesn't fire back towards populations, right? First of all, it tells everyone to leave, and it does every preventive measure to make sure that people leave from the area before they shoot. However, Hamas forces people to be in those buildings.
But I know about that because I have a lot of Lebanese friends who were there for the bombings before, and they said that the red balloons were out and they got papers dropped.
Is there any other country that does that when they're fighting in a war?
No, but I mean, still people's homes are destroyed.
Yes, absolutely. But that's the consequence of war, and a war that Israel doesn't want to be in. However, if you can see that Israel did everything in its power to prevent casualties, there will always be casualties in war. And that's why we shouldn't be in a war.
Yeah.
I'm against being in the war in the first place, right? But if we're going to war, if Hezbollah starts shooting rockets at Israel, Israel has no other choice but to prevent that from happening.
Right.
So then it goes into war, and then people just forget the fact that Hezbollah just shot thousands of rockets and killed Israelis, and Israel's doing everything it can to prevent casualties, and we're just focusing on someone who's died in Lebanon, which is a crime in itself. However, there's a context, and that context has to be understood in order to prevent it from reoccurring. Because our interest is not just to talk on campuses. Our interest is to change the reality, not only for Israeli Palestinians, but all Middle Easterns in general. We're all the children of Abraham. We're all Semites. We're all have very similar culture, ethics, values. Shalom aleichem, salam aleikum, chamesh, chamsa, we have the same language. So at some point we have to get out of the dark ages that we're currently residing in and move forward to an Enlightenment era. Let us figure out as cousins what kind of society we want to build here.
You're right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, not a lot of people do even agree with y'all. You know what I mean? At least not people I've heard here. Maybe you be in Israel, y'all have different ways to talk about it there, but every American Jewish, not every, but most American Jewish people I've met who don't actually know much, who have never even been to Israel and stuff, they'll just take that pro-Israeli stance, the pro-Zionism stance, but for the wrong reasons. For the reasons you're saying I shouldn't equate, is the reason why a lot of Jewish Americans are saying there should be Zionism, because we want they're oh, this is good that this is happening, it'll be something that I think is bad that that's happening, and it's well that's not good for us. That's not good for us. You know what I mean?
I'm trying to fix that also in my community. And part of this movement, I started the chapter at Columbia, we're not right wing, left wing, one state, two state. Our goal is not to push political agendas to people living there. It's to kind of empower the next generation, first of Jews and our allies, to know why this land is important to us and what role we have to play with this land for the people that live there. Not only the Palestinians, but also the Druzim and the Bedouin and the Cherkessim and the Armenians. It's not only Israelis and Palestinians there. Right? And we have to play a role because we are the ones in power today. So we have an even greater responsibility as Jews in power to actually help the region. Middle East, especially the region that we come from, our ancestors, right, is very low on water and is in a drought. So why does Israel have so much water? It's because both the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government were given millions, if not billions of dollars to create like desalinization process and recycle of sewage, like to find other sources of water than just dig in the ground and take the water source. And Israel created lots of technology to do that. And Arafat and Abu Mazen all pocketed that money. So it is a reality that Palestinians don't have equal access to resources, right? And I believe that should be changed. However, we also need to understand the fact that they're in a situation with limited resources is not only because of Israel. And the ones that it is because of Israel, that I will condemn and try to change. But the ones that it isn't because of Israel, that also has to be recognized in order to be stopped.
I think that's fair. I mean, I kind of got to get going, but you're probably the most reasonable person I've ever talked to about this. I'm not gonna lie.
We appreciate you stopping by.
And like when I see SJP, I feel like a lot of like the anti-Semitism in there. The thing is, I always felt like I'm anti-Zionist but not anti-Semitic, which like by how I thought about it is valid, by your definition not valid. Like that's been a sticky thing today. But like when I see the anti-Semitism from SJP, I feel like that's rooted more in Islam.
You as a Palestinian or descendant of a Palestinian should maybe think of creating a space for people like you that might not be as strong and as courageous as you are to be able to go and discuss those issues. And be able to like do an event with a Palestinian group and an Israeli group, not fighting each other, but discussing how we move forward. That's the only way we move forward.
Like I'm not here to get angry. I
know. See, that's good. Like I mean, I like that. It's important. I mean, like,
but it's rare at the same time.
You know what I mean?
From our experience, it's very rare.
It is rare. I mean, it was just last May that SJP came in and started tearing down Israeli flags, shouting at us, spitting on people.
I mean, maybe I'll swing by sometime, but like I've never actually been to any clubs here, so
no, don't worry.
Make that promise. It was good talking.
I think you have Rudy. I think you can have an important role in this campus for those who are amongst the same way of seeing life as well.
Leadership.
If you like our work and would like to support our team in generating content that educates, inspires, and empowers the youth in standing up for Israel and Jewish rights, please click on the link below.